The escape. Hurricane Francis, big and strong, bearing down on Florida. More than 2 million people told to get out of the way. 4 more. President Bush ready to make the case for a second term tonight. The challenge is ahead, and my interview with First Lady Laura Bush. Charges dropped. Why the rape case against Kobe Bryant fell apart. Some fear a chilling effect in future cases. And student chic. Back to school. What's in, what's out. Lessons in fashion and dollars and cents.
This is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw. Reporting tonight from the Republican National Convention in New York.
Good evening from Madison Square Garden, where tonight President George W. Bush rallies his faithful and reaches out to the doubters and the independents with a speech on where he hopes to go from here. But before we get to politics, the president is getting regular updates on another monster storm bearing down on Florida, the second in less than a month. This one is called Hurricane Francis. And as it approaches the Atlantic coast of Florida, mass evacuations are underway. NBC Don Teague is in Florida for us tonight. Don?
Good evening, Tom. Some Florida freeways have been gridlocked since this morning. Many people choosing to leave the state rather than endure a second major hurricane. Florida officials have ordered 2.5 million people to evacuate, the largest evacuation in the state's history, as Hurricane Francis bears down on Florida with 145-mile-per-hour winds.
I don't know if I'd want to be sitting in it right now.
Evacuation routes are jammed with bumper-to-bumper traffic. Many gas stations are already out of gas.
I'm leaving. I'm trying to get out of here, go to Atlanta.
Just 3 weeks after Hurricane Charlie killed 27 people and damaged 30,000 homes, Floridians aren't taking any chances with Francis, a Category 4 monster, twice the size of 1992's Hurricane Andrew and nearly as big as the state of Texas.
This hurricane is capable of causing extreme damage and loss of life if people don't prepare.
Hurricane warnings are posted along most of Florida's east coast. Governor Jeb Bush is warning residents, take them seriously.
This is a deadly storm. It is not something to say, well, I'm going to be macho about it and stay in my condo on the beach.
Coastal residents in several counties have been ordered to evacuate.
The mandatory evacuation.
In Vero Beach, police and volunteers are going house to house, making sure. On Cape Canaveral, patients were taken out of the hospital this morning, and NASA has shut down operations. In Fort Lauderdale, boat owners are fleeing upriver, and hardware stores across the state are running out of supplies.
Right now, we're announcing that we don't have plywood yet at this time,
as millions of residents prepare for the worst.
This is a big one. We're really concerned. It looks like it's coming right at us.
Landfall in Florida is expected Saturday, probably along the central east coast. Residents here are hoping that forecast is wrong.
I hope, finger crossed, everybody.
And of course, you can see this massive line of traffic heading north out of Florida. Now, despite asking coastal residents to evacuate, authorities have asked them not to leave the state, but simply to move 10 or 20 miles in from low-lying areas. Tom?
Thanks very much, Don Teague. Tonight, Hurricane Francis already has roared through the Turks and Caicos Islands and is now pounding the edge of the Bahamas. NBC's Peter Alexander joins us now from Freeport, which, of course, is a population center for the Bahamas. Peter?
Tom, Francis's winds have just started to lash the southeastern edge of the Bahamas, and already one band of heavy rains has passed through. Today, residents on the chain of 700 islands that make up the Bahamas have been told to evacuate along the shoreline. The big concern is that Francis will set off a storm surge with a wall of waves between 6 and 14 feet slamming ashore. Most people here live in poorly built wooden homes. The island's schools have been opened here as shelters, and cruise ships in the area have been ordered out of Francis's path. The full force of Francis is expected to strike overnight and into tomorrow morning, and the Prime Minister has warned everyone to brace for what could be the most intense hurricane in this country's history. Tom?
Thanks very much, Peter Alexander, tonight in Freeport in the Bahamas. Hurricanes, of course, can be so powerful and so destructive. It's no wonder so much time and money is spent on trying to predict exactly where they may hit. But as NBC's chief science correspondent Robert Bazell explains now, hurricane tracking still is an inexact science, as Floridians have already been reminded during this storm season.
The big question, where will it strike?
Look at that! Look at that!
It's hard to get a precise answer, despite satellite photos, airplanes that fly through the hurricane, and computer models that try to account for all the atmosphere's complexities and past behavior of hurricanes.
We have not yet been able to determine with certainty beyond maybe 100 miles a day before the storm where that center is going to cross the coastline.
The reason scientists say is that hurricanes are a unique and powerful force of nature. Often they set their own rules, and forecasters can only watch. Heat from the tropical ocean fuels what becomes an engine with more energy than hundreds of nuclear bombs. With all this power, hurricanes can overwhelm all the predictable winds in the area that might steer them.
They sometimes can essentially set their own course.
On August 13th, Hurricane Charlie hit Florida's west coast, 100 miles south of where forecasters predicted. Frances is twice as large. It's been a well-formed, powerful storm for days. The biggest worry, the storm surge. For Frances, that could be a wall of water as high as 14 feet, 10 to 20 miles wide. Because forecasters can't say where that will hit, people must evacuate hundreds of miles of coastline. Robert Bazell, NBC News, New York.
And of course, here in Madison Square Garden tonight, the main event of this Republican convention, President Bush will accept the nomination of his party for a second term, and he'll talk about the war on terror, the war in Iraq, and the plans that he's making for that second term. NBC's Brian Williams joins me now from the convention floor at the podium. Brian?
Tom, good evening. And first off, this will look a bit different tonight for the folks at home, what they're calling here a kind of theater in the round. The president will come down a catwalk and deliver the speech at least closer to the crowd than normal. The hope is he'll be surrounded by cheering delegates on three sides, adding excitement to the message he wants to convey. Getting a feel for the room, where tonight he'll deliver the speech that kicks off the final 60-day run in pursuit of a second term. This was the president's warm-up.
Of it as a final resting place for those here.
In his speech tonight, the president will defend his domestic record. I am running with a compassionate conservative philosophy that government should help people improve their lives, not try to run their lives. On the foreign front, the president will say, we have fought the terrorists across the earth, not for pride, not for power, but because the lives of our citizens are at stake. Our strategy is clear.
The conscience of the Democratic Party.
The talk inside this convention has to do with last night's dramatic change in tone, especially the remarks of Democratic Senator Zell Miller of Georgia, who delivered a fiery attack against fellow Senate Democrat John Kerry. Going through a laundry list of weapon systems he says Kerry voted against.
This is the man who wants to be the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces. U.S. forces armed with what? Spitballs?
Some Republicans thought Miller's remarks went too far. One senior Bush campaign aide today told NBC News Senator Miller spoke on behalf of himself. Miller was still fired up and defending his speech during an appearance on MSNBC.
Get out of my face. I wish we lived in the day where you could challenge a person to a duel.
Miller's speech was followed by Vice President Dick Cheney, who was less fiery, just as tough on Kerry, and played up the president's role as defender.
George W. Bush will never seek a permission slip to defend the American people.
Now to the imagery at work here tonight. Some aides are already calling this the pitcher's mound area, as in pitching his message to the nation. And we could hear a Teddy Roosevelt reference to his famous In the Arena speech tonight. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Brian Williams tonight on the convention floor. Though this convention has resurrected some of the themes of President Bush's first go-around 4 years ago, the message and the man were both very different back then. That story tonight from NBC's David Gregory.
4 years ago, George W. Bush was still proving himself.
We will write not footnotes, but chapters in the American story.
He preached humility and had little tolerance for nation building.
If we're an arrogant nation, they'll resent us. If we're a humble nation but strong, they'll welcome us.
9/11 changed everything.
The people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
4 years later, having proven his mettle in the ashes of the attacks, the challenge is different. Then he was trying to prove he was up to the job. Now, the president who took the war on terror to Iraq was trying to prove he got it right.
America and the world are safer because Saddam Hussein sits in a prison cell.
Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich says any war president has a heavy burden.
You've got to say, this is painful, this is hard, this is dangerous, and we have no choice. If the president wins that argument, I think he wins a very big election.
But critics argue the president did have choices in Iraq and that the pursuit of Saddam reflected an unwelcome change in America's 9/11 leader.
After 9/11, it looked like strength and constancy. During and after the Iraq War, it looked like stubbornness and arrogance.
Brent Scowcroft, the national security advisor to President Bush's father, has renewed his doubts about the war in an interview with the New York Observer. He says the president has failed to reach beyond the mostly hardline experts around him, who were wrong about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. And the Iraq war, he worries, has made it harder to confront nuclear nations like Iran.
Knowing what I know today, I would have made the same decision.
But now candidate Bush confronts a nation divided over war and over his leadership on other issues as well. Tonight, he'll try to persuade the doubters he needs another 4 years to prove them wrong. David Gregory, NBC News, New York.
In other news tonight, there's been one more sign. Laura Bush talks about the push for a constitutional amendment banning gay marriage and her daughter's performance here this week. Later, the fall fashion trends a Republican can love. Flip up the collars and get out the blazers. The preppy look is back. NBC News in depth tonight. First Lady Laura Bush, probably the most popular member of the Bush family with the public. When she married her husband, she said no speeches, but now everyone agrees she's a big plus for the campaign when she's on the trail or in this hall as she was the other night. Today, I talked to her about Zell Miller's fiery keynote speech last night, gay rights, her father-in-law, and the Bush twins.
John Kerry has been more wrong, more weak, and more wobbly.
Zell Miller lit up these delegates with some very tough language.
I saw it on TV.
About John Kerry and suggested that he was unfit to be commander-in-chief. Do you and the president share that point of view?
I don't know that we share that point of view. I mean, I think Zell Miller has a very interesting viewpoint, just like I had the personal viewpoint to talk about the president when on Tuesday night when I spoke. He has a viewpoint of being a Democrat, being a member of the senator's party, and, sees from a viewpoint that we don't have.
Do you think that this is going to be a tough campaign with that kind of language throughout on both sides, probably?
Sure, but you know what, Tom? Every one of them are. They always are, and I know. I mean, this is the 7th convention I've been to. And, George and I loved a candidate before at a couple of those conventions, his dad. And every single time they're tough. That's just what it is.
Speaking of his father, we were all a little surprised to hear him say this week that he was a little bit hurt when he read that your husband, President George Bush the 43rd, said he was going into Iraq to finish the job that didn't get done in 1991. The president, in fact, said it twice, 41. Were you and the president aware that his feelings were just slightly out of joint on that?
No, of course not. That's the way he does it. He tells the media first. He's a wonderful father-in-law. He's a wonderful man. And George and I adore him, and he knows that.
There was a little buzz, as you know, in the last week or so when Vice President Cheney and Mrs. Cheney said they really prefer the states to handle the question about civil unions and the whole question about homosexual marriage.
What kind of official sanction or approval is going to be granted?
The president's for a constitutional amendment, and it's a little hard for me to determine just where you stand.
Well, I'll tell you what a constitutional amendment debate will do. It'll give people in the United States the chance to debate the issue, to talk about it on both sides. If each state takes it up and discusses it and either chooses to have the amendment or not have the amendment. And I think that's really what this issue needs.
Gainey, we love you dearly, but you're just not very hip.
Did I think they were too wild?
Just Sex in the City aimed at Grammy, thinking that's about married couples and what they do and never talk about it. Did you say to him, are you sure you want to say this? Did you laugh out loud?
I actually did kind of think about it, and I thought, I wonder if those Republicans in the hall will laugh, but they did.
When I asked Mrs. Bush if the president, after making his speech here in the theater in the Round tonight, would lead the crowd in singing New York, New York, or I Did It My Way, she said no, he's musically challenged. He cannot sing. Up next, what's next for Kobe Bryant and his accuser, now that the criminal case is over? That's Nightly News for this Thursday. I'm Tom Brokaw. I'll see you for President Bush's speech to the Republican National Convention and a national television audience beginning at 10 Eastern tonight here on NBC. Don't forget, in addition to our convention coverage, frequent updates on Hurricane Francis on MSNBC on cable.
Next,
Storm watch here in Florida. A tense wait tonight and the desperate search for shelter and supplies before Hurricane Francis.